Welcome back. I'm Austin.
I'm Duncan.
I'm Bryce.
On the mind this week is the Dakota Access Pipeline. And oh boy, is it quite the episode. We've got the legal arguments that we're going to bore you to death, but Bryce is going to save it by talking vigorously about the social issues. But first, to Duncan with a bit of background.
Okay, so just to put this very simply, the Dakota Access Pipeline is a project by Energy Transfer Partners, basically an oil transferring company, LLC. And what it is essentially designed to do is to take oil from the North Dakota oil fields and transfer it down to actually a location in Illinois for further distribution to refineries where it can be used as feedstock for plastics and, of course, for gasoline and other petrochemical purposes. Now, the dispute in question, to outline this, about 346 miles of this proposed pipeline snakes through the U.S. state of Iowa. Now, of that 346 miles, the vast majority is actually on private land that Energy Transfer has already acquired through private means, voluntary sales, etc. And there is a small portion of it that is on land that is claimed by the Standing Rock subdivision of the Sioux tribe.
I thought it was
Sioux.
Okay. Do you know exactly the mileage that's on this?
I could not tell you exactly what mileage it is. I just know that it's a very small portion.
Minute portion? I might look that up while we're doing this.
Yeah, that would be interesting to know, actually.
Okay, keep going.
Anyway, now the dispute comes in this form. Technically speaking, the federal government claimed jurisdiction, and more specifically the Army Corps of Engineers claimed jurisdiction over federally owned land that immediately adjoins the Standing Rock Reservation. The Standing Rock tribe, however, has appealed to an 1868 treaty known as the Treaty of Fort Laramie that they claim gives them rights over this land, which they claim to be sacred and also propose has Native American burial grounds on it. So, now with this, and also the fact that this pipeline would snake immediately under the Missouri River, which has also caused an entirely separate claim regarding water supply safety, the entirety of this project is now mired in a various host of legal disputes, which we are going to get to in a minute. But at this point, protesters are on both federal land and on private land that is owned or leased by Energy Transfer. And of course, in the last, I'd say about 3 to 4 days to the last week, we've been seeing a lot more, especially on social media, stuff like that. We've been seeing a lot of engagement with this story. So this is one of those things that's become sort of a national issue for the time being. It's been in the headlines quite a lot lately.
All right, so any comments, Bryce, before we move on to the legal arguments?
Let me think. Oh, yeah, we were discussing the mileage. I just wanted to say real quick that the route has been changed by the, what was it?
Energy Transfer.
That's right. Sorry about that.
Quite
They've changed the route as to be as courteous to the Sioux tribe as possible. They still do go through some of the land, but they're doing their best to work with the tribes, but they are holding a very firm stance of no way, Jose. We can move on now.
Okay, so interestingly enough, I'm not finding any evidence that it actually goes through there. I've found that it's going on the border, though.
Correct. Specifically, it goes within the land that's involved is federal land that is adjacent to the Standing Rock Reservation. Specifically, it's 1/2 mile away. Mm-hmm. That is the nearest point, I should say, between the pipeline and the Standing Rock Reservation itself is a distance of 1/2 mile.
Okay.
But if I can,
Please do.
There are a lot of spills and leaks and even explosions just in the time that this pipeline has been a social issue and has been all over social media. At least 3 accidents have happened with...
We shared these back and forth, you and I.
Yeah, have happened with oil pipelines, natural gas pipelines. 2 states were in a state of emergency due to these. There could have been more very minor accidents. They happen all the time. If you just Google pipeline accidents in America, you'll find that there is a huge list, and they'll vary. Most of the time, it's very minimal damage, just a little bit of repairs are needed. But sometimes there are deaths, sometimes there are forest fires, sometimes. And then another thing, the Sioux tribe is very worried about this pipeline, should there be an accident, poisoning their water supply, also poisoning the water supply of the Missouri River, which 17 million people rely on.
And that does matter because they're at basically the top of the food chain when it comes to that river. So it would go all the way down. All right, so as far as legal arguments go, it's hard to say that it's on their property.
Correct. In fact, so there are... Now, pardon me, folks, because I'm going to bore you for a few minutes. Okay.
Please stay.
So, there are a number of intersecting areas of law that get pulled into play here. So, number one is, of course, basic property law. Now, the Sioux Reservation that this adjoins is, of course, not part of the same property that this pipeline goes through. With that said, they do claim that the Treaty of Fort Laramie, which I discussed previously, gives them jurisdiction over that land, that federal land, which adjoins their property. Now, this is a very complex issue. The exact reading of the boundaries put out in the treaty, again, this is a treaty from 1868. So this is something that needs to be argued by lawyers who are in a very specialized branch of law in court. I think I speak for all of us when I say that none of us have the legal training that would be required to render an informed opinion on that particular issue.
But we're here with our uninformed ones, so stay tuned.
Anyway, so then you get to the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, which is another federal act which has been used as a justification for the stoppage of this pipeline. However, in that act, Section 106, which is the review section, only requires that if major finds of a cultural, anthropological, paleontological, or archaeological nature are made, the sufficient steps be taken to mitigate damage to those finds, for example, relocating the finds, relocating the project to a reasonable degree. And actually, Bryce already sort of touched on this, that Energy Transfer has voluntarily shifted parts of his project away from areas that there were known to be some archaeological finds to an area which a 2004 survey found did not contain any visible signs of archaeological sites present on that section of this federal land.
I will bring up that there was an injunction that was filed that stated that these finds were sacred to their community.
Correct.
And they're claiming that they went ahead and started construction with those injunctions still in court, which would go against federal rule of law.
Correct.
That you cannot change the status quo.
Correct. Although, slight bit of nuance on this, since the vast majority of the land on which this pipeline is to be built is privately owned and is separate from this disputed land, Energy Transfer can continue construction on the land that they have purchased or leased from private individuals.
However,
or other businesses.
This is also in contention with the 1992 right to be consulted. It says whenever a federal agency is going to undertake or approve a construction project, it must consult with the local native nations about whether sacred sites or places are nearby. And it must be respected even if it's not near reservation land. In this case, it is.
Correct. And in fact, one of the most famous cases of this has come from the Dakotas, where this oil is actually being transported from, which is the Black Hills region of South Dakota. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so as we were kind of getting to, there are a lot of different legal arguments. There's also a National Environmental Policy Act that relates to the water supply as far as how that would potentially impact that. And then, oddly enough, one of the strangest ones that we've seen, and this is, I should say that the rest of these are valid legal arguments. The National Historic Preservation Act argument is probably way too flimsy to hold up in court, since it does not actually require stoppage of a project if fines are made, only that steps be taken to mitigate damage to the fines. One of the strangest ones that really is not even a good legal argument is one of the leaders of the Standing Rock tribe at one point came out and argued that the Standing Rock Nation, the Sioux Nation, in other words, had eminent domain rights outside of their own reservation. Now, I think he was mostly saying that to make a point, but simply to bring up all of the legal arguments involved in this. That falls so flat that it's barely worth mentioning.
Right. Still, the right to be consulted, it seemed to be infringed when the Corps of Engineers went ahead and approved
Correct.
this.
Now, one thing I will say, and I think we can all kind of agree on this from what we were discussing prior to this episode of the podcast, is that there seems to be a lot of misinformation, contradictory information from both sides out there.
Right, and we all came in, we all had different points of view, we
Correct.
all had different information outlets.
Correct.
So it was a little surprising. We usually have relatively similar information when we talk to each other, and
Quite.
that's why I like to talk before these things.
Right.
And it was just strange to see that we all had different points of view here.
Now, with that disclaimer made, one of the probably 30 or so articles that I had read in preparation for this was, in it was stated that the tribal leaders did not feel that they were adequately consulted. Not that they had not been consulted at all, but that
Right.
they had not been consulted to an adequate degree in order for this project to move forward.
Did they at all object to this project?
That was not elaborated upon in this particular
Right.
instance.
I've seen that they've been talked to. I haven't seen if
Correct.
they objected.
Correct.
I read that instead of having any sort of meeting with the Energy Transfer representatives, that they just boycotted the meetings. They didn't show up. They refused to have any sort of conversation.
Yikes.
Not a great diplomatic strategy, but it's what they chose to do.
Yeah. Now,
It's a strong way of saying
Now,
no.
I will say that and here's the thing, guys, again, at home listening, this is a very complicated process, and there are a lot of legal agencies, bureaucratic agencies that are involved in this, and we are not experts on this. But if that was in the portion of the process that was during this consultation phase that deals with the 1992 right to consult, them not showing up to that actually would have likely been seen legally as them ceding their right to register any objections at that series of meetings.
Even though them boycotting it was probably them thinking, well, this is me objecting.
Correct, but again,
Exactly,
in
they
a
have to
legal
be there.
in a legal process, you have
They
to
have to be
register those objections
You have to
in
get
the
it on paper.
in the proper way at the proper time.
There's also the claim that there's two broken laws that have to do with the EPA, which I know you love, Duncan.
You know, actually, I don't hate the EPA as much as you guys think I do. I just think it really I think it's a good idea that has completely overstepped its bounds.
I know. It's just, I like to bring it up with you. It says it violated the Clean Water Act and the National Environmental Policy Act.
Correct.
Because the Missouri River is the only water source for the tribe.
Correct. Now, with that said, again, if there is an issue here, it's actually an issue for the federal government and more specifically the Army Corps of Engineers. Because in the case of Energy Transfer, the company sought and obtained all necessary state and federal permissions that were required to go ahead with this project, which included the Army Corps of Engineers signing off on all safety precautions that had been taken with this pipeline. So, again, if there is a violation issue there, it's actually the federal government violating its own policies as opposed to Energy Transfer and its subsidiaries failing to meet the requirements of those policies.
Absolutely no room for corruption there. I will say that I think it's a little funny that they are not on the hook at all, seeing as it's their project. I understand they went through all the necessary channels. It's just they hadn't known there was going to be uproar. Although I will say it's probably a bit of the reservation's fault for not being in the conversation at all.
Yeah.
So
Again, that's perhaps unconfirmed. It's just one thing
yeah,
I
you
read.
know, they weren't. You said they boycotted.
It was something I read on a website called The Caller, which contradicted information I read on the Huffington Post. Not that information specifically, other possible facts that I had read. So it's not a website I know I can trust.
Now, I will say, kind of regardless of whether that has been the case or not, and again, we're looking at contradictory information and dealing with this, but the tribe's handling of this entire thing has been, it seems to me at least, not as optimal as it could have been, given their end goal of actually, potentially, obviously, stopping the pipeline is not going to happen. I mean, stopping the construction of some kind of pipeline to bring back in light sweet crude down to a distribution facility somewhere in Illinois. That's not going to happen, but certainly rerouting it would have been their primary goal. And with that goal in mind, it does not seem, to me at least, that they have acted in a manner that is really oriented towards achieving that. It seems like they're more trying to make a political statement, which they've done very effectively. I'm going to give them that. They've made a very effective political statement. They've made a very effective social statement. But it does not seem that they are taking the necessary legal steps very effectively that might actually achieve something in this situation.
That's a good point.
If I may, not everyone, unfortunately, is a legal expert. Now, this is a tribe, a very large tribe that I'm sure has its own lawyers that
or at least
very regularly...
At least certainly the resources to bring lawyers in.
So, I mean, you're absolutely right. They should have, if they are not, done the research, hired the lawyers in a very timely, appropriate manner. That being said, Native Americans are a group of people who have always been on the raw end of the deal legally regarding anything.
Actually, you talk about the Treaty of Laramie quite a bit.
Correct.
Was it 11 years after that it was renegotiated?
I think you're thinking of the difference between the 1851 treaty and the 1868 treaty.
Okay.
Which, for reference, the reason that there were two treaties of Fort Laramie was because the Sioux, which were one of the groups that were signed, I believe, in the final version, there were 9 signatories with 8 tribes, and the federal government acting as the 9th signatory. But there was a Sioux-Indian war in between the 1851 treaty and the 1868 treaty.
Right. Hold on here. I could have sworn that 11 years later there was a conflict.
Well, now, just for the record, there have been a series, and I mean, going back to probably about the time you're talking about, there was a very major one in 1920, but a series of lawsuits regarding this treaty, and actually, Austin and I were talking about this. Again, none of us here are professionally trained lawyers, but we were discussing this prior to the taping here, and to really even understand the full legal nuance of how this treaty and its court cases work, you have to go back and read the precedents from probably, the last almost 150 years of court cases that have dealt with this and see how they were left and dealt with.
Right, but I'm speaking from Bryce said they get the raw end of the deal quite a bit. I remember after one of those treaties, I don't remember which one exactly, about 11 years later, if I read correctly, it was renegotiated when the government tried to starve out the Indians.
Sure.
And that's a lot like blackmail.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, it's legally not acceptable to put someone under duress like that and
as much as I totally agree with that, we are talking about now, if there was anyone still alive who had been part of that, I would absolutely accept their legal claim to seek reparations for that. But we're talking about events of 130, 140 years ago.
What's the statute of limitation on blackmail?
I mean, the statute of limitations is effectively a moot point when all participants are dead.
Well, you're talking about a nation here.
Again, when all individual participants in a given deal are dead, the statute of limitations effectively becomes a moot point.
Okay. I'm sure I could argue legally about this for a while.
I mean, pretty much every group of people, very specifically groups of oppressed people, might disagree. I mean, we are a group of 4 white males here. Think of the Armenians or the Native Americans, African Americans. pretty much everybody but white males, I mean, would disagree with that, would like to see something change. And then guess who created these laws? Well, white males.
I hate to say it, but I mean, that has no legal meaning whatsoever. I mean,
as far as statute of limitations goes, I'm just saying that
right.
we're the ones. I mean, not we specifically, but people who were not oppressed created these laws.
But my point is, you can't take things that happened 150 years ago into account in a current court case. Okay,
I actually agree with you, but I'm just.
And I'm making a purely legalistic argument here. So, I mean, the social arguments I'll leave entirely to you, but from a purely legalistic standpoint.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of things I'm going to be talking about later, things that are legal, but maybe perhaps shouldn't be or should have some exceptions on
I definitely think these treaties should be looked through that lens, as though they weren't completely legally obtained. However, it's the way it is right now, and I'm not the one to be making that argument since I'm not a lawyer.
And one other thing that kind of plays into this is that the native tribes, especially the Sioux, their, I guess, legal system, if you were to, talk about it as a system of laws and legislation, was very incompatible with our system at the time. In fact, for the negotiating of the Treaty of Fort Laramie, we being the United States, required them to send representative chiefs to effectively negotiate this treaty. Now, under Sioux custom, that actually really didn't mean anything, because Sioux custom was simple majority. Their civilization, their culture was, at a much more tribal level, where they didn't have vast systems of law that were involved. So it was more or less a straight democratic vote, 51% or whatever, and you would reach a group consensus effectively. So even at the time, the Sioux did not always respect the treaty, because to their minds it had not gone through what they would consider their legal process. So I mean, there have been disputes on this treaty literally since the day that it was put into effect.
No, I have nothing.
Okay. Well, you know what? Let's just move on to what's happening. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right. And what's happening, Bryce? Since you want to talk about the social aspect.
Okay. Oops, kicked the microphone. So let me think. I haven't really prepared like a paper or anything to talk about this. I would like to say, in my mind, it comes down to what the people want. Now, originally, the people have, whether you consider this directly or indirectly, decided that what the legal process should be, and the energy transfer has gone through all of the legal processes. We've decided this through electing officials, leaders who have written the laws. However, the people today have decided that maybe there should be some exceptions to these laws. So perhaps, I mean, what I think should happen, real quick, I think that the president should, honestly, for the safety of energy transfer, order or execute an executive order to halt the entire thing, just because we don't exactly know what's going to happen legally. They may have to reroute the entire thing. Who knows? Probably not the whole thing, but, a large portion of it. So just financially, for their sake, it might be better if they just halted it. Again, I'm not really sure. I'm not
They have a
an
decent
accountant.
amount constructed already. I think 22% is what I read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bryce, I'm sorry, were you finished with your comments, or did
No.
you have more? Okay, keep going. Keep
Oh,
going.
okay.
I have a rebuttal when you're done. But...
Okay.
As is tradition.
So again, as I was saying earlier, these were mostly white males who came up with these laws a long time ago. Now times have changed, things are different. I would like to say a lot of Green Party policies are becoming more popular, especially with Senator Bernie Sanders, who isn't a member of the Green Party. He was an independent for a long time, then he ran for president as a Democrat. He is against this for the environmental reasons. A lot of politicians now are wanting to push towards green energy, such as sunlight, wind power, water power, etc. and this pipeline is in direct conflict with that. Now, as Duncan likes to say, and he's absolutely right, if we were to decide today or tomorrow or next year that we wanted to switch to all green energy, just go cold turkey, just bam, we couldn't do it. It wouldn't meet our needs. However, if we were to go through a process, I think by 2035 is when the Green Party would like to be fully green energy, make America fully green energy, then making this pipeline just wouldn't co-align with that. It'd be a huge waste of money. That being said, this pipeline, Energy Transfer, is going through all the necessary safety precautions. They're doing a good job of doing what they're doing. Now, it's still dangerous, but they're playing it as safe as they can. Do you have any questions? You want any more intake?
There have been a lot of
input?
violence.
Oh,
from what
okay.
I've read.
Yeah, so your tax dollars, my tax dollars, all of our tax dollars are being put to militarize the police. They're using, actually, I believe it was Energy Transfer using dogs, not a militarized police using dogs.
Yeah, private security officers armed with dogs.
Yes, to actually bite peaceful protesters and their horses. Now there are riot gear police officers armed with rubber bullets. I'm not sure if they are... you guys are looking at me funny.
Huh?
No. I'm
Okay.
just listening to you.
Again, a
looking at
lot
this
of
article
what I've
funny.
read may be inaccurate, but I believe that's...
The rubber bullet thing is definitely accurate.
Yes.
In case that's what you were wondering.
I'm not sure if shots have been fired per se.
They
Yes,
have.
they have.
They have? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
They have, on both sides, mind you.
Also-
I'll
Oh,
get
really?
to that in my rebuttal.
Also, I've read that 6 people were bitten by dogs, including a child. But
Yes.
2 of those dogs are injured, and 1 security officer from the private security officers was taken to the hospital.
So there's a lot of violence going around. It's not good. Now, it's really funny because when Energy Transfer rerouted the first time from Bismarck, North Dakota to Standing Rock, it was because it was cheaper. Now, I read that it was also because the people of Bismarck were worried that it would poison their drinking water, and so they moved it to Standing Rock. I don't think that's accurate. I looked it up. I didn't find anything disputing it, and I think that... I don't know. I didn't find anything supporting it either. But regardless, it was supposed to be $23 million cheaper, 11 miles shorter, and I think now it's probably run more expensive at this point. And then with the long legal process as well, probably will be much more expensive for them. I'm out of things to talk about unless you have any more
so let's get
questions.
to the rebuttal.
Okay, I have 2 brief points I'd like to rebut from your first answer, and then just a brief rebuttal to your second answer. Your idea of an executive order to stop all construction on the Keystone Pipeline, I have to say I would disagree with, on the basis that the vast majority of this is on land that Energy Transfer owns and has purchased from private sellers.
If I may, real quick, I think he's just looking for Obama to step in like he did with Keystone. Is
Okay.
what Bryce is
Now, with
actually
that,
implying.
Now, with that said, you actually did say that it would save them money not to continue. And I totally agree. I actually do totally agree with that. But the second point I wanted to bring up is that it is not the place of the federal government to dictate what is and is not a good business decision to a private firm. If the private firm wants to continue, if they are confident enough that they are eventually going to be approved to go through the route that has been pre-approved by the Army Corps of Engineers, by the state of Iowa, and by the federal government, that they feel confident in continuing to construct the pipeline as it was originally planned, I really do not think that the federal government should have any ability to continue that injunction on the land that is privately owned and non-disputed. Now, on the land that is disputed, obviously, the fact that there is a federal lawsuit pending does very much mitigate that fact and does completely change that point. Now, with regards to the sort of police tactics that have been used on protesters, I think we can all agree that a lot of overreaction has occurred.
On both sides.
With that said, Here's my problem with this. There are, again, two different types of land that are in question here. One is federal land, that's the disputed land, and the other is privately held and bought or leased, I should say, from private sellers. With that said, on the federal land, that being public land, protesters are entirely free and legally allowed to protest as much as they want. There is a very large protester camp. In fact, the largest protester camp is on this federal land that, no authorities have really touched. They do have police there to ensure that there isn't some sort of violence that breaks out, but that has not really been touched. All of the conflicts between protesters and police, federal and private security have occurred on the private lands, which by definition, these protesters are actually breaking the law in order to be on. They are legally trespassing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. If I might interject right there, I was reading, I mentioned this earlier, that the land that they're protesting on, they claimed had sacred significance to their tribe.
Correct, but nevertheless, it is privately owned, bought from private sellers. There is no legal argument to be made for their right to be there.
Sure there is. There's the 1992 thing, right to be...
The right to be consulted does not confer ownership.
However, destroying that property would be protest worthy.
I hate
especially
to say it,
if it breaks federal rule of law.
I hate to say it, but if it's bought from a private seller by a private buyer, they have absolutely no right to be on that land.
However, breaking that federal rule of law, status quo and all, by going ahead and destroying that is illegal.
And as much as I agree with that, if there is a legal issue there, it's the federal government, not Energy Transfers.
Okay. Actually, wouldn't it be because they went ahead even though the injunction was already filed in court?
The injunction refers only to the federal lands. Now, if they are doing anything on the federal lands, that is entirely legal. However, again, these lands that are privately purchased from private buyers, that is an entirely separate issue. Because
if they claim that it has sacred value to their tribe, then it is, in fact, their problem. The injunction was filed because of all the relocation with the Indians.
Correct.
There has been laws put in place.
Correct.
That if this site is sacred, it cannot be destroyed. However, Energy Transfer, knowing that site was being claimed as sacred, went ahead and constructed on it.
Again, unless it's part of the federal injunction, unless it is land that is within the bounds of the lawsuit that has been filed, which does not pertain to the nearly 346 miles of privately purchased property that the Keystone, God. I'm sorry, I'm going back in time.
It's okay.
The
not very far.
That the Dakota Access Pipeline is being constructed on. None of that privately owned land can really be affected by that federal injunction. As long, again...
I'm pretty sure that's a federal law that I'm talking about. The injunction was just the lawsuit to stop that construction.
Correct.
So, yes, it is illegal what they're doing.
I hate to say it, I really do disagree, because this was already land that was under private use for business purposes. So, for example, Cannonball Ranch, which is the area that protesters have recently been cleared from to return to the federal camp, this is already land that was being used for private business purposes.
Okay,
If I can, it sounds like you guys are running into circles a bit. I don't want to play moderator here.
That's usually my job.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to have to agree to disagree there. I believe that Energy Transfer is breaking a law. And you obviously think private property... And I do agree private property laws are important. However, the government has a responsibility to stand up to the very little rights that we have given the Native Americans. But anyway, let's move on.
You had more rebuttal, Duncan?
I had one more thing I did want to
I didn't think it was going to go that far. Sorry about that. I thought it was going to be real quick.
No, it's quite all right. I did have just one more very brief point that I did want to bring up, which is basically just the fact that the way that this has been handled with protesters on private land attempting to obviously slow the progress of the pipeline has been more or less counterproductive. I mean, we're talking about people actively breaking the law to go onto private property and to protest where they don't really have any right to protest. So past that point, they really do lose their legal rights to be on that land. And while I do agree that this has been sort of a massive overreaction, one thing we do have to understand is that, and I'm actually giving credit to the protesters, both Sioux Native and the people who have just come to show solidarity with them. 99.9999% of these protesters have been peaceful. They have been mostly on the federal lands, mostly trying to respect the rule of law while trying to get their point across. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. We do live in very uncertain times. You know, the Dallas police shootings, which we've actually done a podcast about. I'm sure 99.999% of the people who were there to peacefully protest in accordance with the rule of law for something they really believed in. Unfortunately, 5 police officers ended up getting gunned down by a sniper who was not really affiliated with any of those people. High-profile protests like this invite freelance lunatics these days. It's an unfortunate fact, and I mean, that should not reflect on the people who are there peacefully protesting on the lands where they should be peacefully protesting. With that said, I can understand the position of the police in terms of having the necessary precautions put in place in case a situation like that should break out, especially given how high profile this case has become.
Can I respond? I did a very poor job at communicating my points, or excuse me, I had sort of 2 points and I only explained one when I was talking about why I believe that President Obama should or have an executive order to halt the entire process. So yes, it would save Energy Transfer a lot of money. I think that one right there is a protection, and the government is here for our protection, after all. But also for the protection of the protesters and the militarized police that, in my opinion, shouldn't be there at all, but they are. And then also the private security officers, if there are any still. I'm sure there are, probably, on some of the protest sites. Just like we talked about, there are rubber bullets going around, and thank God no one yet has been seriously injured or killed. But just to ensure that, I think it should be halted. Also, I think we have missed a huge point here. Not all of what the Sioux tribe is protesting is their land being violated. It's also their sort of unofficial slogan is "We are water." Look at, say, what happened in Flint. A lot of people are even relating this to Flint, Michigan. With the water there, how it's poison. You can't drink it, and to this day, right? They still can't drink it. It's bad. There's a bunch of chemicals. The city tried to save money. They changed pipes. I don't know. You guys are all looking at me weird. I don't know what that means. I'm just gonna move on. You can dispute it later, I guess. After.
So if you're cool, I'd like to just bring up one final quick point. So the only thing I want to do. Quick point is, as long as we depend on oil and hydrocarbons as our primary source of energy, that has to be moved. And unfortunately, there's this thing called rivers and watersheds. Yes, they do present a danger, and I'm absolutely in agreement with you on this, that putting oil pipelines across watersheds does present a certain danger. With that said, unfortunately, it is a fact of reality as we are, as our society currently is. It's simply a fact that we have to deal with. We can take the best precautions we have. That's why the Army Corps of Engineers had to sign off on this project. But, there comes a point where you have to pragmatically say, what is the best we can do? what is the best we can do to ensure safety on these projects and limit the environmental impact. And I think what you have to recognize is that the practical alternative to a pipeline, to a distribution center, is transporting this on trucks, okay? And trucks, if you transported this much oil, we're talking about 570,000 barrels a day is the estimated capacity of this pipeline. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of trucks. We're increasing the load of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide going into the atmosphere. We're also increasing the chances that these chemicals are going to end up becoming airborne through truck accidents, which are much more common on interstate highways than they are, obviously there's a higher rate of accidents on interstate highways than there are on oil pipelines. I'm not saying, I'm actually completely in agreement with you that there are dangers posed by this, but there is sort of the pragmatic argument to be made past a point.
Sure. If I can add anything, it would be with everything, there's good and bad, pretty much. With ice cream, there's good and bad. Yeah, it tastes good, and every now and then, if you have it, it's probably pretty good for you. Just like all things, it makes you happy. And then with the internet, a lot of crime happens on the internet. A lot of good happens on the internet. That's the way it is with everything. With, say, green energy, right now, it's more expensive. It's not as practical for our needs, and the technology isn't there yet. Now, eventually, it will be. Eventually, it will be even cheaper. There might be other problems with it that we haven't exactly discovered yet. Regardless, we're not exactly there yet. So I guess I'm just agreeing with you. You're right. The alternatives are very tempting, and in the long run, may be better. But this pipeline, I guess, if you're trying to, it's a step forward. What I'm saying, it's not a step backwards. It's not huge progress. It's not the future, but for right now, it's probably the best reasonable answer. I think we could probably all agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't disagree with either of you. You've made very solid points there. Well, I guess we just move on to the closing statements, actually. I'm going to take it that you two don't want to rehash what you just said, unless you have more to add. I'm sure you will.
I'll let him go first.
Because you both talked like legal ramifications, not so much touched on what you want the social issues to be resolved.
I have social issues in my closing statement.
Okay, well, let's just get started with them then.
Okay.
You want to take
Let him go first.
Okay.
All right. So here's what you should do. Research, get acquainted with, get comfortable with energy, what it takes to make the world go round, where technology is going, what this means, what are realistic goals, realistic timelines, and then write to your House representative. Try to get bills passed written and then passed with just realistic goals. Keep that in mind. Whether that be you want to vote for the Green Party, the Libertarian Party. I actually did find a group of Republicans and Libertarians for environmental needs. I was really interested. It was called Republican.
Oh yeah,
EN.
Yeah. I think I like them on Facebook.
Yeah. So there are groups like this for everybody. Really, whether you're liberal or conservative, what have you. So just educate yourselves, become acquainted, vote, run, write for your representative, do whatever. Just that's the best way to make change.
Okay, so I guess I'm going to go a little bit narrower here. To the people who are against the current pipeline proposal. Protests and, Facebook messages and all this stuff, they're good for telling people what your positions are, explaining your positions, and perhaps generating future change in the legislative process like what Bryce was talking about. If you're actually against this pipeline going through as it currently sits, the best path is not protest. The best path isn't, solidarity messages on Facebook. The best path is to sit down and come up with legal arguments that can be argued in the courts under the process that we have right now. In politics these days, we have a very, I guess, idealistic vein, I suppose I would say, that, the entire process could change in the future. That really isn't something you should plan on. It isn't something that you should plan for, and it probably isn't something that's going to happen. The best way to affect small changes, whether you agree with this pipeline, whether you disagree with this pipeline, whatever your position is, and I have to admit, I see good arguments on both sides here. If you disagree, if you agree, the best way to familiarize yourself with the issues and to, get anything done about it is to understand the underlying legal arguments in our current process and to work within the framework that we have right now to affect change in a pragmatic and practical manner.
Right. All right. It's easy to get emotional when you feel your well-being is being threatened, as they seem to. I have to agree. If you don't go through the proper channels, you're never going to be listened to, especially not in our government. I can understand it being frustrated being from a Native American background, even dealing with our government, seeing as they never seem to truly listen to them. I think they started winning cases around 1980.
Yeah, with the onset of NAM, or the Native American movement, there was a considerable uptick in that. Yes,
that's good. That's what they needed to do to begin with, is find out how our legal system works and go through that route. I can understand wanting to protect at all costs. However, going on private property, not right. I will agree with you on that. I do think that there needs to be careful consideration of laws or acts or what have you that restrict what can be done on sacred ground, because none of it's running through their property. If I remember right, Duncan said the closest was a half-mile away.
In terms of the pipeline to the border of the reservation.
Absolutely.
Correct.
That's the closest it gets.
Correct, yes.
Right. All right, so I guess I'd like to see less violence. That's always what you're going to hear from me, honestly. I don't like to see American citizens being injured in any capacity, whether that be economically or physically, especially not physically. However, I also would say if you're going to protest, please don't take your kid. I don't like that one was injured by a dog. That seems incredibly irresponsible. I really wish that didn't happen.
Probably also shouldn't take your pistol with you.
Was that confirmed?
So the article I was reading cited an NBC article. So I'm fairly well convinced on that. Now, this wasn't some incident where police got shot or whatever. Someone took a couple of pot shots above the heads of people. He wasn't apparently even aiming for these people. It was more of a statement issue.
Okay.
Although I'm sure this person was detained for that action.
I hope so.
As would I.
Yeah.
Also, don't take your dog.
That's the private security forces, I'm sure.
Yes.
It seems unreasonable to threaten people with unreasonable beings. I mean, I'm sure you can say, oh, the dogs are severely trained. It's hard to reason with an animal that's growling in your face. It's easy to reason with people when you're talking to them. Open lines of communication. That's something I wish the tribe would have done in the first place to stop this to begin. However, it didn't happen. There doesn't seem any recourse to prevent it from happening now. So please play damage control. Play nice, please. And let's figure out a way to prevent this sort of fiasco from happening in the future. Anything else from you two?
Oh, one time, not that long ago,
In Bangkok?
the article said thousands, but the video showed maybe just above 100, maybe 100 to 200
Definitely
buffalo.
dozens.
These buffalo came onto the grounds where these people were protesting, and then all of the Native American people were clapping and cheering, and it was almost like something out of a movie where and I'm getting extremely stereotypical and quite possibly a little bit racist when I say this, but it was almost like some sort of spirit animals coming and protesting with the people.
So
It was an amazing video. It was quite beautiful and really fun to watch.
So I guess I have like one last tiny thing I want to just say.
Closing statement.
I'm sorry, he did one. I get to do one.
All right.
If anyone who happens to be at these protests on the off chance hears this, there have been like tire fires and that sort of thing going around with the barricades over the highways and whatnot. If you're going to try and be environmental activists, please stop burning tires, because that's actually way, way worse for the environment in the present moment than this pipeline is. So
And their future spills. Anyway.
So please, if you happen to hear this, please stop doing that, because it really makes you look hypocritical.
That's true. All right, well, I think that's all that's on the mind this week. Thanks for joining us. Join the discussion on our Facebook page. We will have a linked.
Or on our YouTube comments section. Please comment your thoughts and tell us what you think. Tell us we're idiots. Tell us we're geniuses. Tell us we don't know what we're talking about.
All right. That's all we have. Good night.
And good luck.
Thank you, Edward R. Murrow.